London, the Savoy Hotel. It's a January morning when everything changes. James Crawford, 42 years old, worth $4.5 billion, is leaving his luxury hotel when he sees a 9-year-old girl sleeping on a worn blanket outside the entrance. Her little bare feet are blue from the London cold. All the passers-by ignore this small, huddled figure. James stops, kneels beside her, and what he does in the next moments will shock anyone who sees it. Because sometimes one gesture is enough to reveal who we really are. And James is about to discover that true wealth isn't measured in pounds, but in heartbeats. The Savoy Hotel stood majestically on the Strand, in the heart of London's West End. Its neoclassical facades reflected the golden morning light, whilst Mercedes and Bentleys alternated in front of the entrance in a silent ballet of luxury and power. James Crawford left the Savoy Hotel that January morning, his cashmere overcoat perfectly draped over his shoulders. At 42, he was one of Europe's wealthiest men, owner of a financial empire spanning from property to cutting-edge technology. He had just finished a business breakfast with Japanese investors and was heading to his Rolls-Royce for the next appointment. As he walked towards the exit, something caught his attention. In the corner between the hotel and the adjacent building, where shadow created a hidden niche, lay a small, huddled form. It was a girl lying on a worn blanket, wearing a brown dress that was far too big, and a jacket that must once have been white. Her bare feet, small and delicate, were blue with cold. The girl slept with her body contracted in a position that spoke of cold, fear, and loneliness. Brown hair fell across her face, but James could tell she was no more than 8 or 9 years old. James's heart stopped. In all his years of success, he had never seen anything that touched him so deeply. This girl was sleeping in front of one of London's most luxurious hotels, where he paid £3,000 per night for a suite. He looked around. Even at this morning hour, dozens of people walked along the Strand, businessmen, tourists, Londoners heading to work. All had seen this girl, all had chosen not to see her, to look away, to quicken their pace as if ignorance could erase reality. James approached slowly. The girl didn't move, but he noticed she was pretending to sleep out of fear. The icy January wind blew between the buildings, and James realized the temperature had dropped below freezing. This girl was at risk of hypothermia. For a moment, he hesitated. His life was perfectly controlled, every decision calculated. But looking at this small figure who was shivering, all his certainties wavered. He removed his cashmere overcoat and knelt beside the girl, covering her bare legs with gentle movements. The girl opened her eyes. They were large, brown, filled with a fear no child should ever feel. She looked at him as if he were a creature from another world, a man in a £5,000 suit who was kneeling in the cold to help. In a gentle voice, James asked what her name was. The girl stared at him for long seconds, then whispered a word that would forever change both their lives. James remained kneeling beside the girl, whose name was Ruby, and who was 9 years old. The cold from the pavement penetrated through his suit trousers, but he didn't notice. Ruby had sat up, clutching the cashmere overcoat as if it were treasure. The story Ruby told was devastating in its simplicity. Her parents had died the previous year. Her mother had fallen ill. Her father had died in a workplace accident. She had been in a children's home, but had run away because things weren't going well there. For 2 weeks she had been sleeping rough. During the day she went to King's Cross Station where it was warmer. James realized that Ruby had strategically chosen this spot. The hotel had discreet but effective security, and the presence of wealthy guests kept troublemakers away. This 9-year-old girl had found the safest possible haven in a city that had forgotten her. When James asked if she was hungry, Ruby nodded without shame. She had only eaten a sandwich that a lady had given her the previous evening. It was 10 o'clock in the morning, and James knew the hotel restaurant was still serving breakfast. He stood and offered her his hand. He told her to come with him to eat something warm. Ruby hesitated, saying she couldn't enter the hotel because she was dirty. James replied firmly that he lived there, and Ruby was his guest. In the lift, Ruby looked at everything with wide eyes, whispering that everything was so beautiful, like a doll's house. But it was frightening, too beautiful for her. Those words pierced James more than any negative business report. Arriving at the presidential suite, Ruby remained frozen at the threshold, intimidated by the luxury. James told her to come in, to make herself at home. Ruby replied with disarming honesty that she had never had a home like this. When breakfast service arrived, Ruby hid behind James, intimidated. Whilst eating slowly, in small bites, James understood she wanted to make this moment last as long as possible. Occasionally, she raised her eyes to him, as if to make sure everything was real. James told her she couldn't go back to sleeping on the street, not in this cold. Ruby asked where she could go, her voice betraying fear of being sent back to a children's home. James looked at this girl eating in London's most expensive suite and made the most important decision of his life. He told her she could stay here, with him, until they found a better solution. Ruby stopped with the spoon halfway to her mouth, asking if it was really possible. James confirmed it, and for the first time since he had found her, Ruby smiled. The days that followed were the strangest and most unexpected of James's life. Ruby had transformed from a street child into a little princess of the hotel, but the deepest change had occurred in him. The next morning, James woke and for a moment thought he had dreamt everything. Then he heard sounds from the sitting room and found Ruby watching London from the 20th floor with wondering eyes. The first thing he did was take her shopping. Bond Street was just 2 steps away, and James discovered the pleasure of seeing Ruby's eyes light up in front of shop windows. He bought her clothes, shoes, toys, everything a girl could desire. Ruby protested that it was too much, that she couldn't accept everything because she wasn't rich like him and couldn't reciprocate. James knelt in front of her, explaining that when you love someone, you expect nothing in return. Ruby asked if he loved her, and James realized it was true. Ruby hugged him tightly, and James felt something melt inside him. It was the first time in years that someone had embraced him without ulterior motives, without wanting to get something. It was a pure embrace, full of gratitude and affection. In the evening, whilst dining together, Ruby asked the question James both feared and desired: whether she could stay with him forever. James confessed he didn't know how to be a father. He had never had children. His life had always been only work. Ruby told him he had saved her, and when someone saves you, they become your family. James asked her if she would like him to become her daddy. Ruby replied that it was what she wanted more than anything in the world. That night, James spent hours on the phone with his solicitors, learning about adoption procedures. The next day, he proposed to Ruby that they go to live in a real house, where she would have her room and her garden, and he would be her daddy forever. Ruby jumped from her chair and threw herself into his arms, screaming with joy. James lifted her and spun her around the suite, both laughing as they never had before. 3 months later, they moved to a house in Richmond, with a large garden. James had drastically reduced his work commitments to dedicate himself to his new life as a father. The house filled with laughter, drawings on the fridge, cartoons on Sunday mornings, bedtime stories. One evening, whilst tucking her into bed, Ruby asked if she could call him Daddy. James, his voice broken with emotion, told her nothing in the world would make him happier. Ruby whispered, Daddy. And that word resonated like the most beautiful melody James had ever heard.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
A year after that morning in front of the hotel, James and Ruby had become a family in every sense. The adoption procedures had concluded without hitches, and above all, it was evident to everyone that an authentic bond existed between them. Ruby, now 10 years old, attended one of London's best private schools. Her marks were excellent, but what made James proudest was her ability to make friends. After years of loneliness, she had blossomed into a confident, generous girl full of life. Their daily life was filled with small moments of happiness. Breakfasts together, afternoons in the park, dinners where Ruby told everything about her day. James had learnt to plait hair, to distinguish between cartoons, to cook the spaghetti bolognese that Ruby preferred. Not everything had been simple. Ruby carried the scars of her difficult childhood. Nightmares, panic moments when James was late, fear of being abandoned. James had learned to handle these crises with patience, often holding her in his arms until she calmed down. One night, after a particularly bad nightmare, Ruby asked if he had promised never to leave her. James told her he would love her always, even if she did bad things, even if she got poor marks, even if she became an unbearable teenager. One afternoon in the park, Ruby saw a lost and frightened boy, and without hesitation comforted him until his parents arrived. James watched the scene with pride, seeing how Ruby's empathy had grown from her experience. When he asked why she had helped that boy, Ruby replied that she knew what it was like to feel lost and frightened, and how wonderful it was when someone helped you. James stopped and hugged her, telling her how proud he was of her. That evening, Ruby made a proposal that left James speechless. She said they were a happy family, but there were other children without families who needed help. She proposed opening a house where children could live well, be happy, be loved. James smiled and told her it was a fantastic idea. They would immediately start thinking about how to make it happen, and they would call it Ruby House. Ruby clapped with joy. That night, James reflected on how much his life had changed. A year before, he had been a rich but lonely man. Now he was a daddy, with a daughter who had transformed his heart of stone into a heart capable of infinite love. 2 years after that encounter that changed everything, James and Ruby opened Ruby House, a care center for abandoned children that had become a model throughout Britain. The restored Victorian mansion on the outskirts of London could house up to 50 children in a family environment. Ruby, now 12 years old, had become the project's ambassador. Her involvement wasn't merely symbolic. She participated in decisions, suggested improvements, and above all, welcomed newcomers with the understanding of someone who had lived the same experience. The opening ceremony attracted national media attention. James, who had once avoided publicity, now sought it to raise public awareness. During his speech before journalists and authorities, he told how 3 years earlier he had found a girl sleeping in front of his hotel, and how he had understood that all the success in the world was worth nothing if you didn't share it. Ruby took the microphone after him, saying in a clear voice that she was that girl, that her daddy had saved her, but she had saved him. Because love always works in both directions. The applause was warm and sincere. Many present had tears in their eyes. In the months that followed, Ruby House became a reference point for child welfare. The children received quality education, psychological support, and above all, unconditional love. James had further reduced his work commitments to dedicate himself to the project. He discovered that managing Ruby House was more rewarding than any financial speculation. Seeing children grow, study, smile, was the best remuneration he could desire. One evening, whilst watching the children play in the garden, Ruby asked if her biological parents would be proud of her. James hugged her, telling her he was certain they would be. But he was even prouder because she had transformed her pain into love for others. Ruby observed that she had learnt it from him, that he had transformed his money into love for her and all these children. At 44, James had finally understood the true meaning of success. It wasn't measured in billions, but in children's smiles, in changed lives, in restored hopes. One evening, whilst reading a story to a group of children, he noticed Ruby watching him from the doorway. Later, she told him she was thinking that he had become the daddy of all these children, not just hers. James confirmed it was true, but she remained his special princess. Ruby said she was happy he was the daddy of all of them. It meant no child had to sleep on the street as she had done. James promised they would continue to grow, opening more houses, helping more and more children. 5 years after that fateful morning, James and Ruby had created an empire of love that extended far beyond Ruby House. Now 14, Ruby had become an intelligent young woman full of compassion, whilst James had transformed his wealth into an instrument of social change. Their story had inspired hundreds of families across Britain to adopt children in need. Ruby House had become a network of 15 facilities that had helped over 3,000 children find new families or build futures. One January morning, exactly 5 years after their first meeting, they returned to the Savoy Hotel. It had become an annual tradition, a way to remember where it all began. Ruby, now as tall as James, said she remembered everything about that morning. The cold, the fear, the loneliness, but also the moment when he had knelt beside her. It had been the moment when her life had truly begun. James confessed to her that he remembered thinking she was the most beautiful and precious thing he had ever seen. Ruby made him a proposal. She wanted their foundation to become international, for Ruby Houses to be born worldwide to help all children as she had been. James asked if she believed they could manage it. Ruby replied that together they could do anything. He had taught her that. That evening they worked late on projects to expand their mission. Ruby had inherited from her adoptive father not only love, but also the determination to transform dreams into reality. Before going to sleep, Ruby confessed that that morning in front of the hotel, she had made a wish looking at the clouds, that someone would come who truly loved her and allowed her to love other children like herself. The wish had come completely true. James hugged her, telling her she had been the greatest blessing of his life. Ruby replied that he had been the same for her, but the most beautiful thing was that their story wasn't finished. Now, it was their turn to become the blessing for other children. Father and daughter fell asleep, knowing their love had already changed the world for thousands of children. The Savoy Hotel was still there, but now that pavement had a small plaque. At this place, love changed 2 lives and began to change the world. Passers-by stopped to read. Many were moved, and above all, many decided to do something to help children in need. Because love, when it's true, is contagious. James and Ruby had proved it. Sometimes, to change the world, it's enough to save one child. And sometimes, to save yourself, it's enough to let a child save you. All it takes is the courage to kneel beside someone who needs help and say, "I'm here for you." Has this story moved you? Has it made you reflect on how a gesture of love can forever change 2 lives, and then the whole world? If you too believe that love is the most powerful force in the universe, that every child deserves a family that loves them, and that sometimes it's enough to kneel beside someone to change the destiny of 2 people. Like and share this video. Tell us in the comments, Have you ever made a spontaneous gesture that changed someone's life? Do you believe love can truly transform the world? Do you think we all deserve a second chance to be happy? Subscribe to the channel for more stories celebrating the power of love, the strength of compassion, and the magic that happens when we open our hearts to those who need us. Like, comment, share, because every story of love reminds us that true wealth isn't measured in money, but in heartbeats, that the greatest happiness comes from giving love, and that sometimes all it takes to change the world is to kneel beside a girl sleeping on the street and whisper, "What's your name?"